Let's talk about the GED test. This is a presentation that I put together. I've shared it with groups of students before. Seems like it's really helpful, so I wanted to make a video going through the same information just in case you wanted to review anything that maybe we've already talked about in class. All of this information you can find at GED.com. If you are one of my students, if you're a student at Next Step where I teach, if you're interested in taking the GED tests, you really need to go there. All of this information is very easy to find on that website. It's freely available. If you've never been to GED.com, just stop watching this video and go there, because you're going to learn more from exploring that website than you probably will from this video. But let's continue. There are 4 GED tests. You don't have to take them all in the same day. I really strongly recommend that students don't take them all at once, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But there are 4 tests covering 4 different subjects: reasoning through language arts, math, science, social studies. Those are the 4. And that's in order from longest to shortest. Reasoning through language arts is the longest, and mostly that's because you're going to be writing an extended response during the language arts test. You have about 45 minutes to write what amounts to an essay. You have 45 minutes to write an essay while you're taking the language arts test. That's what makes it so long. The next longest is math, and then science and social studies are both shorter tests. Social studies used to be a little bit longer. There used to actually be an extended response on the social studies test, but they took that out. So those are the 4 tests covering the 4 subjects. Those are the things that you're going to need to study and have some competency in order to take and pass and do well on the GED test. And I mentioned earlier that I don't recommend students take these all in the same day. And the reason for that is I've seen students take all 4 tests in one day and fail all 4 tests in one day. And that's really hard to recover from. And it's unnecessary. From the time that you pass your first test, there's no time limit, no clock starts ticking trying to get you to take the 4th and final test. You have as much time as you need to study and be prepared for the tests. If you take all 4 tests in the same day, that's going to be 6, 7, 8 hours of testing. That's a full day of testing. You're going to be exhausted. And no matter how well prepared you are, if you're testing for 8 hours in a day, you're going to be exhausted, and you're not going to do as well by the end of the day as you would have if you had broken it up over several days or even several weeks. So those are your 4 tests. I would recommend taking 1 a day, maybe 1 a week, spacing them out and making sure that you're really prepared for all 4 of those subjects. I can't tell you how many questions are on the test because I honestly don't know, but I can tell you the lengths. And not an hour and 50 minutes. That's 150 minutes. That's 2.5 hours for the reasoning through language arts test. That's a significant amount of time. So let's talk about what you can expect to find on the 4 tests. We'll start with math because a lot of times this is the test that gives students the most anxiety. When I talk to students and I say, all right, what was your favorite subject? What was your least favorite subject in school? They'll say their favorite subject was, art or PE or lunch. And their least favorite subject, almost without exception, is math. Nobody likes math. Everybody had a bad experience with math in high school for some reason. So this is the test that a lot of times students will put off until the very end. They'll take the other 3 tests first and then really devote time studying for their math test. This is the one that gives them the most anxiety. And some of that is for good reason. It's a difficult test, but it's not impossible. And students, in my experience, tend to do much better on this test than they expect. If you prepare, if you study, if you invest your time wisely to get ready for this test, then there's no reason that you can't do well. The test is broken into 2 main categories, which are quantitative problem solving and algebraic problem solving. Quantitative problem solving is computation, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, Those are the basic operations. Geometry. Do you know how to find area of a circle? Do you know how to find the perimeter of a triangle? Charts and graphs, data and statistics. Those are all under quantitative. Quantitative is basically everything but algebra. And the other big category is algebraic problem solving. And that's variables, linear equations. You're simplifying expressions, solving equations. Solving equations means finding the value of a variable, finding a missing value, graphing lines, finding slope, doing linear equations, doing functions. Those are all under the category of algebraic problem solving. So it's not quite 50-50. It's 45 quantitative, 55 algebraic. I don't know why they didn't just make it 50-50, but you can expect to find a pretty decent mixture of both of those topics. If you don't know how to do any algebra, you should study that before you take the GED math test, because a little bit more than half of the test is going to be algebra. That doesn't mean that you have to know how to do quadratic equations. It doesn't mean that you have to know how to do everything with algebra. A good, strong, basic understanding of algebra will really serve you well. The good news here is that trigonometry, calculus, those kinds of things are not on the test. It's really focused on quantitative and algebraic problem solving. And that's good news. Here's more good news. You get 2 aids when you go in to take the math test. You get 2 assistants, so to speak, when you go in to take the test. The first is a formula sheet. So like I mentioned earlier, area, perimeter, surface area, volume, mean, median, slope, quadratic formula, those kinds of things you don't need to memorize anymore. When I was going to school, I had to memorize those things. I learned songs. I have a song memorized for the quadratic formula. It goes -b plus or minus square root of a squared minus 4, or square root of b squared. See, I don't even remember it. So the good news is you don't have to remember it. You don't have to embarrass yourself by singing a song and getting it wrong. It's all going to be right there, and you can carry a formula sheet in with you when you go to take the test. And the second good news, and maybe you're more excited about this one, is that you get a calculator, and it's a really nice calculator. You can only bring in a specific kind, which is what you see here on the screen, a TI-30XS multi-view, and it's going to be that kind of bluish greenish color. That's the kind that you can bring in with you to take the test. And you can use it on almost the entire test. There will be a few questions at the beginning of the test, quantitative questions, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, where you won't be able to use a calculator. So you should know how to do long division by hand. I'm just going to throw that out there. But for most of the test, if you're doing surface area or volume, for example, you're probably going to have access to a calculator. And that's good news. If you don't have that physical specific calculator, there will be a button on the screen that says calculator. And if you're taking the test and you're like, man, I really wish I had a calculator, you can click a button on the screen and a calculator will appear on your computer screen because the test is computerized. And same for formula. There will be a button that says formulas, and you'll click it and a formula sheet will pop up. So you don't necessarily need to carry these physical things into the test with you when you go to take the test, but they are good aids to have. So that's math. That's kind of what to expect on math. Reasoning through language arts. So it's not just a reading test, but it's a language arts test. It's going to involve some writing and some editing in addition to reading. And for the reading, 75% of what you read will be informational. That means it's going to be true, probably a little bit boring, probably a little bit technical, something that you're not maybe naturally interested in. And then 25% of the passages will be literary. That'll be stories, biographies, memoirs, things like that, things that tell a story. So if you're studying for the language arts test, focus on nonfiction. Read a newspaper. I think that's going to be something that's really helpful, because newspapers are almost entirely informational. There's going to be a little bit of literary writing in a newspaper in the editorial section or in the features or something like that. But most of what you see on the front page of a newspaper is going to be informational. So read a newspaper. That's a great source of relevant and interesting informational text. And Newspaper articles also tend to be about the length that you should expect for the GED test. The passages are going to range from 400 to 900 words in length. If you can't visualize what that means, that's pretty short. That means it's going to fit on one piece of paper. So you're not going to be reading novels. You're not going to be reading an entire Shakespeare play. You're actually not going to be reading any plays by Shakespeare or any poetry, which breaks my heart a little bit because I'm an English nerd, but 400 to 900 words in length is moderately short. For writing, like I said earlier, you're going to be writing an extended response. The three categories that you're going to be graded on for your extended response are creation of argument and use of evidence, development of ideas and organizational structure, and clarity and command of standard English conventions. So those are the three things. If you want more information on those, you can go to GED.com and read a little bit more. I'm not going to go into detail on those because I can talk endlessly about them. And then the last thing here is editing. You will actually be given some grammar questions, some spelling and maybe not spelling, but capitalization, punctuation types of questions where you're going to have maybe a letter or an email and a sentence is going to be missing and you need to choose the sentence that's grammatically correct to complete the thought of the person who's writing it. So there's going to be a little bit of, you should have some idea of grammar, not just for the extended response, but there will be questions just about grammar, about editing, because that's a useful skill. For social studies is the good news here is that it's mosely going to be another reading test. I mentioned earlier that there used to be an extended response on the social studies test. It's not there anymore because it wasn't really adding anything to the extended response you're already writing for the language arts test. So social studies is short and it's going to be a lot of reading. There might be some charts and graphs, some maps, timelines, things like that you need to read and interpret, and some math comes in there. But a lot of it is going to be, it's another reading test. It's a shorter and more focused reading test where you're going to be reading historical passages. You're going to be reading things called primary sources, which means something created by somebody who experienced a historical event. So maybe, something like the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution are primary sources. Something like Anne Frank's diary is a primary source. Martin Luther King's speeches are primary sources. They're not necessarily written by famous people, but they're written by people who were there when history happened. So somebody who experienced the Civil War or somebody who experienced World War II and wrote about it. You're going to be reading things like that. 50% of the social studies test is civics and government. That's big. If you don't know what that means, it basically means, and specifically it's talking about the United States civics and government. And what that means is, what does it mean to be a citizen in the United States? How does the government work? What are your rights and responsibilities? There will probably be some questions about the Bill of Rights, about voting and the history of voting and things like that. The division of national and state governments, things like that would fall under the category of civics and government. U.S. history is 20%. So that's the next biggest category, and it's significantly less. U.S. history, and then economics and geography and the world. So if you're studying for this, focus on U.S. history, especially as it relates to government, the history of the U.S. government. So if you're interested in studying civics and government, focus on United States history, United States government, how our government was formed, the ideas that contributed to the Constitution and the Revolutionary War. The good news here is sort of like with the formula sheet where you don't need to memorize formulas. With the social studies test, you don't need to memorize names, dates, presidents, state capitals, or anything like that. It's not memorizing facts. You're going to be given material to read or to interpret, and you're going to respond to that by answering questions. So that's why I say it's really just like another reading test. And then the last test here is science. The three big categories: life science, physical science, earth and space science. Science, this test maybe more than any other is a blend of reading and math. And again, like the social studies test, you don't need to memorize a bunch of facts. You don't need to memorize the periodic table or who discovered plutonium or anything like that, you need to have some familiarity, maybe a little bit of familiarity with like the scientific method and how to design an experiment. If I say independent and dependent variable, that should mean something to you. But other than that, it's going to be reading. It's going to be reading a passage maybe about physics, about chemistry, about biology, and answering questions about those things. 40% is life science, 40% is physical science. Life science is biology and anatomy. Physical science is physics and chemistry. And then 20% is going to be earth and space science. So a big idea on the science test is energy. Think about energy. How does energy move? Where does energy come from? How do we use energy? Things like that. That's going to be something that kind of applies in all of those different subjects. So those are the 4 subjects. Those are the 4 tests. In order to schedule and take these tests, and you do need to schedule them ahead of time, in order to schedule and take these tests, you're going to need to go to GED.com and create an account there. You can't go around GED.com. You have to kind of play by their rules. So a couple things to keep in mind when you go to GED.com. You're going to do student sign up. It will look like this. It'll ask for an email. It'll ask for a password. The first thing you should know is that you should not create multiple accounts. If you already have a GED.com account and you forgot the password, figure out that password. Don't just keep creating multiple accounts, because if I create, one account and I take my language arts test, and then a couple weeks later I forgot my password, so I create another account and I take my math test. GED.com views those 2 accounts as 2 different people. So in the eyes of GED.com, one person is taking the language arts test and another person is taking the math test, even if they have the same name, and birthday and address. GED.com views those as 2 different people. And it's really difficult to get GED to merge those 2 accounts. So don't create multiple accounts. If you've created an account in the past, just use that one and use a real email address. They will send you emails. They will send you an email when you pass a test to say, hey, you passed. So make sure it's a real email. Don't just create a new email address for this account, but use an email that you actually have access to and are familiar with. That's the first thing to remember. And then once you're creating an account, it's going to ask for your first and last name. And the last thing I want to say here is that your name should be what appears on your government issued photo ID. So if you have a driver's license, put your name in here as it appears on your driver's license, because when you show up to take the test, you're going to need to show your driver's license to say, yeah, I am the person who scheduled this test, in order to kind of verify that you are who you say you are. I can't just sign up to take a test and then hire my much smarter cousin to show up and take the test for me. I need to verify I'm actually the one who's taking the test. So put your name in as it appears on your driver's license or your government issued photo ID, not your library card, not your school ID. Side note, if you don't have a government issued photo ID, you're going to need one, because when you show up to take the test, they're going to ask to see it in order to verify that you are who you say you are. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind. If you haven't created a GED account and you want to, you can do that at GED.com. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, if there's anything that I didn't answer. Thank you.